Good Neighbours, a short Dvar Torah for Parashat Tetze. As usual, Parashat Tetze throws me directly into the question of context. Is there a common thread weaving all these commandments together? If so, what is it? The question is relevant to every parasha based entirely on commandments, but gains extra significance in Tetze, which holds the title Mitzvah Champion. What then connects one commandment to the other in this parasha? Different commentators have offered a range of interpretation to this question, starting with Ibn Ezra, who goes through each commandment and connects it to the previous one. Therefore, for example, the commandment not to leave a hanged person on a tree is related to the preceding war commandments, followed by the commandment to return lost items so as not to mistakenly think that it doesn't apply during wartime. After these commandments, a woman's prohibition from wearing men's clothing and vice versa because he believes their purpose is to prevent promiscuousness, something war invites, and immediately following these is the sending away of the mother bird because war happens when traveling and bird nests are found on the road. Rashi's method is slightly different. First, he doesn't explain the juxtaposition of every commandment and thus doesn't explain the connection of any of the commandments we've seen so far to each other. The connection between the commandment we concluded with, sending away the mother bird, and the next commandment, the commandment of building a parapet for one's roof, he explains that if you fulfill the commandment of sending away the mother bird, you will merit to build a new house and construct a parapet for. This connection seems slightly more homiletical to my taste than Ibn Ezra's. Ibn Ezra's interpretation's advantage, the insistence of explaining the context of each commandment, is also its disadvantage. Sometimes the context seems a bit forced, although we could say the opposite about Rashi's interpretation, which leaves work of weaving the commandments to each other to us. I am neither Rashi nor Ibn Ezra, therefore from the outset I won't presume to solve the connection between all the commandments, but rather to point out a common characteristic in many of the commandments in the parasha. As a test case, I want to address a small cluster of commandments in Perek Kaf. Let's start with the three commandments that relatively straightforward context. The prohibition against sowing mixed seeds, plowing simultaneously with an ox and a donkey, and wearing a garment of wool and linen. In principle, I could have tried to understand the specific reasons for each commandment. For example, I could explain that Hashem is compassionate towards the donkey plowing with the ox. Then we're left only to clarify whether the compassion for the donkey is not to pair it with a stronger animal, like Ibn Ezra says, or not to cause it distress when the ox chews its cud. The hungry donkey thinks there's food around, not understanding how the ox continues chewing. This is Rabbi Yosef Kara's explanation. But then we would miss what's common to the previous and next commandments, which also require creating a clear separation between different species. In the plant world, mixed seeds, the animal world, plowing, and the combination between them, wool and linen. Or maybe the inanimate world, wool and linen. Or perhaps the speaking world, human clothing made of wool and linen. In any case, what brings these commandments together is separation. We don't need to look far to add another commandment to this group. The commandment preceding this cluster of commandments is building a parapet. What do the parapet and separation have in common? Simple. The purpose of the parapet is to separate your roof from the air on the other side, or more accurately from the ground at the end of the air on the other side, or maybe separate you from the ground on the end of the air on the other side. Skipping over the commandment to send away the mother bird brings us to the prohibition for a man and a woman to wear each other's clothes. Here, too, is a demand for clear separation between sexes and their clothing. Other commandments cry out for separation as well. The partial distancing from Egyptians and Edomites, the absolute distancing from Ammonites, Moabites, and Mamzerim, removing the impure from the camp, the prohibition of male and female prostitution, having relations with an animal, a slave, a man with a man. Although most prohibitions are essentially abstaining and separation from something, in these prohibitions the motif of separation is much more prominent. To the outside observer, the impression that arises from these distancing and separations greatly strengthens the understanding that the Israelites are a people that dwells alone and will not be reckoned among other nations. The formative story began with Avraham, the Hebrew, who was on one side of the divide and the rest of the world on the other. But how does this correspond with God's blessing to Avraham, and all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you, or with you, or combined to you? How are they blessed from or in a people so closed off and separate? But further examination reveals that the purpose of the fences is not to distance, but actually to bring closer correctly. The parapet is intended to allow hospitality without danger. The Edomites and Egyptians required distancing to stop being abominable, which they were at the time, and join us after 3 generations. Immediately after the prohibition of wool and linen, it's revealed, according to the commentators, how wool and linen can go together. In tzitzit, Gdilim ta'aseh, you shall make yourself twisted cords. Even the distant Moabites and Ammonites ultimately join the messianic royal lineage to produce Bet David. The purpose of this separation is not excess snobbery. It's to mainly clarify each thing's selfhood, and through that, to produce the most appropriate connection. In other words, good fences make good neighbors. The goal is not the high fences, the goal is the relationship with the neighbors that will be created. In memory of my beloved and heroic student Amichai Shimon ben Batya and Ishai Rubin Hashem Yikom Damo, I am Jovi Holtz, one who loves Tanakh.